my not-so-nice neighbor. In 2018, I moved into a small, two-story property in England with my then-boyfriend. It was in a quiet cul-de-sac with houses crammed together, all facing each other. I am very introverted and don't typically socialize much with neighbors. Still, we naturally ran into a few and exchanged pleasantries, as you would, right? One of our new neighbors, Greg, was incredibly welcoming right from the start. He was an older gentleman, the kind who would stop you for a chat that would drag on and on until you made up an excuse for why you really had to get going. He shared local stories, asked about and took note of our birthdays, and even invited us to a garden party where anyone and everyone was welcome. His house was directly across the street from mine, with his windows in clear view of mine. A couple of years went by, and during this time, my boyfriend and I split up. Although I never expressly shared this news with my neighbors, word must have gotten around when his car stopped showing up in the driveway. He moved out and left the country, but we stayed in touch regularly as friends. Having the house to myself felt lonely, so I got a cat to keep me company. He quickly became, and still is, my world. Greg would often flag me down to talk whenever he saw me leaving or returning home. It was annoying, but I could live with it. I'd update my ex about weird little interactions with Greg, which we both found amusing to gossip about. One such incident was when Greg came to my door to hand over 2 of my parcels, one of which was a large table he had yet to retrieve from his house. I had been raiding an Elder Scrolls Online at the time, doing a deathless speedrun for an achievement. Given the time constraint in my game, I told him I'd leave the door unlocked so he could simply put the package by the door. I sat back down at my desk, put my headset on, and my group charged at the final boss. I heard my front door open, followed by the sound of my large parcel being placed down. Then I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I glanced back to see Greg standing there, eyes fixed on me. Not wanting to disappoint my raid group, I continued playing until we killed the boss, then took off my headset. Greg's face lit up, and he started talking about how amazing it was to watch me play. I got the impression he had never seen someone use a keyboard, let alone play games. He begged me to teach him and rambled on. He was clearly intoxicated, so I laughed it off and gave a non-committal response. Despite repeated attempts to politely encourage him to leave, he seemed disappointed when I finally walked over to the door and opened it, clearly signaling it was time to go. He left without further incident. In the UK, houses often have individual outdoor bins for trash, which must be rolled to the street the night before collection. You're expected to bring the bins back to your property after collection. I noticed someone kept bringing my bins back in for me. Was I blocking someone's car by being too slow to do it? Around the same time, I also noticed someone had been using my bins. I brought it up to Greg one day when he flagged me down, and he said the same thing had been happening to him. Maybe it was petty of me, but I decided to tape an old phone with a surveillance app to my window overlooking the bins to figure out who it was. Lo and behold, it was Greg. I chalked it up to him running out of bin space after the local council moved from weekly to bi-weekly collections due to staffing issues. Although it bothered me, my desire to avoid confrontation won out in the end. Christmas rolled around, and the COVID-19 pandemic was in full swing. One late evening, I heard a knock at my door and walked over to see who it was. I had no peephole, so I opened the door not knowing what to expect. Greg stood on my doorstep, which was not particularly unusual. I'd gotten all too used to his antics. I immediately caught a strong waft of alcohol, but he spoke before I had time to react. He told me he had a Christmas present for me and handed over a red gift bag with colored tissue paper covering the contents. I really want to give you a kiss on the cheek, but I can't, not with this pandemic going around, he said. That gave me the heebie-jeebies, so I did all I could to politely end the interaction and retreat back inside. He held me up by rambling on about who knows what. I firmly told him I was busy and needed to go. That's when he laid a hand on my shoulder, leaned in, kissed my cheek, and then walked off in the direction of his house. I closed the door and stood there for a few moments in shock. The present was odd. Beneath the tissue paper were 2 bottles of Belgian beer, a can of half-eaten Pringles, sour cream and onion, and a small plastic bag of chocolates. I recognized the chocolates. A next-door neighbor with young children had come around a few weeks earlier to put similar bags of chocolates and a handwritten note, signed with their address, through everyone's mail slots. It was a sweet gesture, probably something they came up with to keep their stir-crazy kids busy. Upon inspecting the regifted chocolates, I noticed he'd even forgotten to remove the note from the neighbor. The kiss and gift gave me bad vibes, and I regretted accepting it. I decided I was done being mispolite and resolved to be firm in my future rejections. On the second day of the new year, I was feeling lazy and ordered food delivery. A mere 5 minutes after receiving my order, there was a knock at my door. Knowing the delivery driver hadn't forgotten anything, I concluded this had to be Greg. And then it clicked for me. He'd often turn up immediately after anything was delivered to my door. He was constantly watching my house. Was he dumping trash in my bins as an excuse to hang around? He called out to me through the door. I felt too uncomfortable to answer and retreated upstairs, out of view of the windows. Later that night, he came back and kept knocking, but once again I ignored it, hoping he would go away. The following day, I contacted the police to file a harassment report. I felt sheepish doing so. Was it really that bad? He was just a lonely old man, and I hadn't been firm enough. When asked if I wanted the police to speak with him, I said I'd handle it myself. I just wanted the report on file in case anything else happened. I would later become grateful for filing the report. Greg turned up at my door a few days later, telling me how worried he was about me. I told him directly, I think it's best if we don't have any contact going forward. His response was eerie. I just wanted to be your friend. I held my ground, cut the conversation short, and closed the door. Finally, it's over, I thought. A year went by without incident. Everything seemed fine, with no knocks on the door or unwanted conversations while I was outside. One night in winter, I was leaving my house to get groceries. It was completely dark outside, save for a lamppost casting sparse light onto the street. My driveway was at the side of my house, where the bins were stored. The driveway was blocked in by a tall panel fence to add some privacy, as the kitchen window was directly next to it. You could see right into my kitchen and living room through this window. As I was outside locking the door, I saw a figure in the dark slinking out of my driveway and behind the fence. I immediately unlocked the door and went back inside. It was dark, I could have imagined it. But my gut told me otherwise. Was someone waiting for me behind the fence? I ultimately trusted my instincts and decided to forego the groceries for the night. I bought and mounted a motion sensor light to illuminate my driveway. The memory of the shadowy figure quickly faded from my mind, and the new light gave me some comfort that I'd at least be alerted if someone was lurking outside my window. A couple of months after the incident, I was in my kitchen getting food for my beloved cat. The window was directly to my left, around 3 feet away from where I stood. As I dumped the cat food into a bowl, I suddenly became aware of my motion sensor light being on. I scanned the outside, not seeing anything until my eye landed on something in the bottom corner of the window. I squinted, trying to make out what I was looking at. It somehow wasn't properly illuminated. I kept staring for what must have been 30 seconds. The light outside remained on. Suddenly, Greg popped up into view, directly outside. He'd been crouched down, peering in from the corner of the window. I'm normally cool as a cucumber. I never raise my voice or yell. But I truly lost it at that moment, screaming, "What are you doing?" repeatedly. He just stood there, then nonchalantly asked, "Are you all right?" I kept screaming, but now it was, "Why are you there?" He walked off into the dark. I immediately called the police. Typically, the police in England leave something to be desired, but I have to give them credit for how they handled this situation. They took my statement over the phone and gave me a reference number. I received a couple of follow-up calls with updates and was told they'd bring him to the station. I was also informed that he was known to the police for having previously followed young women. Sometime later, he was arrested at his property, in front of a wife I didn't even know existed. They did this to scare him, according to the officer I spoke to make a point. Sadly, he received nothing more than a police caution, which forbade him from being on my side of the cul-de-sac or contacting me. Still, it seemed to work. The window incident was the last real interaction I ever had with Greg. I did see him staring at me in the shower from his window once when I forgot to close the blinds, but nothing else. I have since moved far away.